It's Tony from Old River Hardgoods again. Today we're going to take a look at some of the tools that were used and made during the 18th century. Some of you may remember me from my years of selling at 18th century events like the Fort Frederick Market Fair in Big Pool, Maryland, the Colonial Craftsman Fair at Jerusalem Mill in Kingsville, Maryland, the 18th century Revolutionary War weekend up at Old Mill Village in New Milford, PA, and the Jacobsburg Rendezvous at Bolton, PA. I've also done demonstrations at Old Mill Village, the Pennsylvania side of Washington Crossing State Park, and for a number of years at the 18th century Lord Stirling Festival in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. So sit back and enjoy, and I hope you learned something. Okay, we're going to start with a pair of plow planes from the 18th century. A plow plane was a tool that was used for making a groove in the wood. The width of the groove was determined by the size of the iron. Now, in normally what you'd call a blade, these were made, the body's made of iron. This one isn't original, but hopefully you can kind of see the color difference where there's a little bit of steel laid on the top there, and that forms the cutting surface. And of course these are notched in the back to fit into the plane. They have an iron skate on the side. The iron rests on and also helps to guide the plane through the cutting process. How deep in you go is regulated by the fence here. And this is a wedge arm plow, so there are wedges that hold the arms in place. This one also has a mechanical depth stop. You turn the screw and then the steel foot there can be raised or lowered depending on how deep of a cut you want to make. This plane here was made by John Cogdell in London, England. He worked from 1750 until 1765. And it's in, of course, pretty rough shape. It's missing the wedges. This one has a wooden depth stop. Those were just friction fit, and unfortunately the friction usually won. You can see the old iron rivets holding the body on, holding the skate to the body from this side, and of course there's lots of worm damage and some checks in the arms, and it's not really a user plane, but you don't see too many examples by the. And if you look at the picture of the mark, you'll see that the John is spelled with I, capital I instead of a J, which was kind of the practice back in the 18th century. This plane was made by John Green, O.H.N. Green of York, England. It was kind of a family business, and they were around from 1768 until 1808. They also made edge tools like chisels and planing irons as well. This one, somebody replaced the wedges on with copper or brass wedges a long time ago, but they did a nice job of it. This one's actually been my user plane in the past. And it does a pretty good job. The wedge was replaced too at some point. That's unfortunately common with a lot of these older planes. Three more early planes. There is a moving Philister. This was made by John Manners of Glasgow, England. He worked from 1792 until 1822. A Philister plane cuts a rabbet or step on the side of a board. This has a depth stop controlled by the screws here, a fence that controls the width of the cut, also adjusted by screws. And there's another style of Philister that the English primarily made called the sash Philister. This looks more like a plow plane, except that it's got a flat sole with a blade mounted at an angle, which we call a skew, and has arms like a plow plane. This is a panel raising or fielding plane. This was made by William Laurie of Edinburgh, Scotland, and he worked from 1774 until 1813. A panel raiser, of course, is used for making wooden panels, such as used in shutters and door frames, and as well as wall panels. I've seen that treatment as well. This also has a movable fence, a movable depth stop on the side, and the iron is mounted at a skew or an angle. This is so the plane can be used both with the grain and making cuts against the grain. This is another one of those planes that I have used in the past. And last is this little sash plane. This is one of the only ones in this presentation that I believe to be of American origin. It doesn't have a maker's mark on it, but it was found in the southeast region of Pennsylvania, so the style says that too. If you note the shape of the tote or handle, and the early strike button, and the cut. This was used for making the wooden sash bars that went into making wooden windows. This one unfortunately had the blade replaced or the iron replaced at some point in time, but it's just kind of sitting in my collection, so we're not going to really worry about that. Last of the planes we're going to look at today, there is a round plane by Phineas Turner, who was a York, England maker who worked for a very short time from 1771 until 1773. A round plane cuts a 1/6 of a circle or a 60-degree cut, and there would have been a matching hollow to go with this plane, which is a concave cut, and these were made in various sizes and shapes. Next is a hollow plane. This was made by Christopher Gabriel, who's one of the better known and better documented makers of the era. He worked from 1770, and the family continued the business into the 1820s. I kind of have the wedge sticking partially out because it wants to stick in the wedge, and I haven't gotten around to doing anything as far as cleaning this guy up. Next plane is another one by the John Green family. So a complex molder. This one's in very good shape for the age. Somebody did add a little bit more to the fence to move the cut over. Planes like these were made in several different sizes in the same shape. So you might have one to cut, 1 inch, 1¼ inch, 1½ inch, 2 inches. And of course there are also different shapes of cuts that were available. Last here is a complex molder by William Maddox. He was a London, England maker who worked from 1748 until 1775. This one's also a complex. I never really cleaned this one. Note the very thick iron. I suspect that this one's fairly early in his working life. Also, it's a little longer than the others. but if I wanted to, I could clean it up and still probably use this guy. Okay, our last bit of tools for the day. First, there's a woodworking gouge by Samuel Newbold. He was first listed as an edge tool maker in the 1787 Gales Directory of Sheffield, England, and the firm continued for a very long time after his passing until 1901. This one is 18th century because of the style of the shoulders, and this also has a bit of steel forge welded onto an iron body. Unfortunately, the forge weld didn't hold, or the rust got to the steel, so this one's not really usable. And of course, the handle was replaced at some point in time, but there's a hole in the back for some reason. But you don't see too many 18th century chisels around, chisels and gouges. Next is a drawbore pin. This was used for making pinned mortise and tenon joints. You would drill a hole through the mortise side of the piece, put them together, mark the center, and then offset that hole by just a little bit so that when you put the piece back together, the holes didn't quite line up, and you would use an iron pin like this, drive an iron pin like this into the hole to line it up and make sure the joint was very tight and snug. A similar technique is used in timber frame barn building, except on a much, of course, with tools on a much bigger scale. And for what was once a pretty common item, these guys don't show up very often at all either. Next, we have an early saw with a hand-forged blade. This may not be 18th century, but it's definitely in the style of it. It has no back. The teeth have no set to them, but it's fairly thick at the center, and it doesn't flex hardly at all. The handle was replaced at some point, but things like that happen with old tools. And last, we have a big wing compass divider, 18th century style. 3-finger joint on it. What's unusual about this one is that the one tip, let me get the right one up. The one tip was forged into a spade-shaped blade. This was used for cutting circles, possibly for leather work, also for woodworking, where you want to scribe a large circle on a piece of wood before cutting it out, or even for cutting out circles of veneer to be used in decoration and inlays. This is also not a very common tool. And that's all for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed and learned a little bit. And keep on watching for our next video to come out. Bye.